Hey Rebels, welcome back to my channel. My name is Basting, and you guys are watching RWS, which is Randoms with Shades, and moi, am Shades the Rebel. So, it is Tuesday morning, 8 a.m., and if you're joining, thank you very much. Join the live chat, ask whatever questions if you do come across something that startles you a bit. And also, please, if it's your first time here, please don't forget to like or even subscribe because we're trying to get people to learn more about patterns and making your own comments. So let's get into the video. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the pattern making terminology. Yes, we are. So please get out your notebook as well as pens because everything that I'm going to mention here, you're going to need to write down and do not forget. Might also, start studying just in case, we might have a test. I'm just joking. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. But before we get started, I use these two textbooks. I got these textbooks from school when I was studying fashion design at the Durban University of Technology. And these have been the only textbooks that I've used ever. And I do want to start exploring and using different kinds of textbooks. The first one here is a pattern for lingerie, beachwear, as well as leisure wear by Anne Hager. And the next one is this one called The Matrix Pattern Cutting for Women's Wear by Winifred Aldrich. So these are the two textbooks that I use. The one is more for your woven fabrics and the other one is for like your stretch fabrics. And these have been very helpful and this is what I've been using to draft my patterns. I find it helpful and hopefully, we can obviously share different types of pattern books that have helped us. If you are in the fashion industry already and you're just checking out this video, and if it is like your way of learning something new coming onto this channel, well, you know what, I've got you, sis. i've I've got you, sis, or brother, whoever's learning or studying. So, like I said, I will be giving you guys terminology. One thing I must mention also is that as I'll be speaking about the words or the terminologies, there will be some images that come up to help you understand a little bit better what I am talking about, and also to just get an idea of what it would look like if you had to make it on your own pattern. Another thing is there are so many words when it comes to pattern making. There are just so many. I even have forgotten some. Doing my research, I had to like remind myself of, oh yeah, I remember there was such a word. So yeah, I will be sharing you guys the words that I commonly use and words that I frequently see on patterns that I have made, obviously, and also some words that I think that you should know just in case you might come across it if you ever had to either download patterns from the internet or just doing your own little research or studying on the net. So yeah. The first word is apex. Now, an apex is the highest point of a dot. If you don't know what a dot is, a dot, which is the next word, a dot is a wedge of the fabric that is used to shape the fabric into whatever garment that you're making, as well as it is also used to remove any extra fabric. So usually if there's a garment and you put it on someone and it doesn't fit well, maybe in the areas where it curves, there is extra fabric, then a dot would be added onto that area. Or if a armhole is gaping. Speaking of armhole, we're going to be looking at the arm side. Now, the arm side is the measurement of an armhole. On a pattern block, we have a space called the armhole where you attach the sleeve, and that area, or when measured with a measuring tape, is called an arm side. So we've already mentioned three words, which was apex, dot, and armscye. So if you're writing down these notes, I will be reminding you guys of what words I've already passed by. But also feel free to go back in the video if you did miss something. The next word is basting. Basting is basically a holding stitch or a temporary stitch used to either hold pieces together or make sure that pleats are in the right place, and it's just used. It's made by stitching, either using a hand or using a machine, and that's what a basting stitch is. The next word is balance point. So balance point are the marks that help align fabric pieces when constructing a garment. This is a little bit more intricate. You would have to do it to understand it a lot better, but I hope you can understand what a balance point is if you look at the image. And basically, if balance points are points that we would use if we were grading. So to make a pattern either smaller or bigger, you would need to have balance points. And we're gonna look into that a little bit more in the week. So speaking of grading, basically grading is making your garment either smaller or bigger, while making the block smaller or bigger. And this is for either if you're making mass production of a certain style, so you would want to have different sizes so that you can accommodate a lot of people when it comes to that. And then also if you have a certain sized block and you're making a garment for someone, a client, and they are either smaller or bigger, so you'd have to grade the pattern up or grade it down in order for the client to be able to fit into it. So the next word is bias, and basically on bias, let me explain it like this. If you have a piece of fabric that is rectangular, as you guys can see in the image, you have an area of the yarns going down or up vertically, basically, and the other area, which is the other yarns, are going horizontal, and those are called the warps, right? And the diagonal direction of that fabric is called the bias, and that part is actually the stretchiest part of that fabric. So with woven fabrics, even though they don't stretch much, that's where you would find the most stretch. And then that's how we also get things like your bias tape, um that or cutting on bias. That usually means that you're cutting at a 45-degree angle. Okay. So the next word is center back or center front, and basically this is self-explanatory, but the center of a pattern block, and it's either at the back or at the front, and you just need to label it correctly as you can see in the image. And we also get a a side back and a side front, which would be basically on the sides. The next word is blocks. So blocks are basically pieces that make up a garment, but these pieces do not have a seam allowance. And these are the blocks that we use. We trace them down and then change them up into whatever design that we want it to be. And speaking of seam allowance is the next word. And basically, the seam allowance is it's the area between the sewing line and the edge of the cloth. So usually I give myself a 1 centimeter seam allowance if it's a woven fabric, and if it's a stretch fabric, I give myself a 6 millimeter seam allowance. So you would have to know your measurements when it comes to that, so that when you start stitching, you're not stitching either too big or too small in terms of your seam allowance. The next word is ease. Ease. Okay, so when I explained yesterday about the measuring tape on how to measure yourself, and I gave you the tip that make sure that you have a finger space between the measuring tape and your body, that space is called ease. And also, ease is also referred to the space in a garment that allows for movement, or they could also call it wearing ease. So, and the next word is fold line. Fold line. So basically, the fold line, you would either write it on the pattern. This is very helpful when it comes to cutting your fabric, cutting that pattern piece on your fabric. And usually your front is cut on fold. And what that means basically is you would have to fold the fabric and then place that pattern on the fold. So you cut it on the fold, which then on that fabric that would be the fold line. And also if you are making pleats, so when it comes to your pattern, your pleat will be represented with a line before adding any extra spacing. You then would have to label that line as the fold line. So it will be the fold line of the pleat, and basically that represents where you would fold the fabric. And speaking of spacing on fabric, we have slash and spread or slash and flare. This is a technique that is used to add fullness on a garment. So things like gathers, things like your pleats, those are used to add um fullness to a garment as well as flaring. So yeah, when they say slash and spread, this is commonly used for pleats. So you would slash a certain part of the pattern piece and then open it in equal spacing all around. So the spacing between the top of that pattern piece and the bottom would have to be equal, basically parallel. And slash and flare, as it suggests, flare, your pattern piece would be cut on a certain line, but instead of spacing those pieces in equal lengths, you would have to just space either the bottom or the top, and the top or the bottom, whichever one you didn't space, is going to remain kissing or remain very close to each other. The next word is notches. So notches are either represented with a line or an upside down T or a triangle. And these marks are marks on a pattern that are used to match two corresponding patterns. So usually we would match up your armhole as well as your sleeve. So you'd need a notch to know where and how you're supposed to attach the sleeve onto the armhole. So yeah, it's very important that you need to have that. So the next word is pivoting. And now usually on our pattern blocks, we already have dots there, especially if it's a woven fabric pattern block. And with that being said, sometimes there is a dot at an area where you wouldn't want it, and according to the design, you shouldn't have a dot there. So we would have to pivot that dot to an area where you would want it to be. And basically, you're just moving a dot from a certain place to another place. For example, our bodice pattern block has a shoulder dot as well as a waist separation dot. So the one dot is at the shoulder and the other is at the waist or the center of the pattern. And if you didn't want your dot to be at the shoulder, you could always pivot that dot and move it to your waist separation dot. So that is what pivoting is. Another word that is commonly used is COD. Rather, it's an abbreviation that is commonly used. And COD basically means cut out dot. So, usually with woven fabrics, there are different weights. You get your light weights, medium weights, and heavy weights. And when it comes to your heavy weights, if you are to make a dot or sew a dot on a heavyweight fabric, sometimes the fabric is too thick that it actually bulks and it can be hard to sew, or it can be uncomfortable to wear because of how thick it is. And so with that, you would have to cut out the dot and just sew it and have seam allowance around that dot in order to reduce the bulkage of the fabric and also make it easier for you to sew. So that's what cut out dot means. Another word that you will hear me use a lot, and I think this one is very simple, everyone should know it, is tracing. What we usually do when we make a certain design, we take our basic pattern block and we trace that pattern block onto a pattern paper, and then we're going to start adding our lines and start designing the pattern block. And so, yeah, tracing is really something simple, and yeah. Okay, guys, so because I've already mentioned these, pleats pleats are folds on a garment that either make it look pretty or sometimes it's a mistake. So how does it happen that you have a pleat that is a mistake? It's usually in the armhole area for me when you attach the sleeve to the armhole, and because of the curves, sometimes easing the fabric. Remember, we already learned about easing. Sometimes easing the head of the sleeve into the armhole can be a bit tricky for me. And so I will sometimes end up having a pleat on my sleeve seam, which is a mistake pleat. But you also get pleated skirts, you get pleated tops, you get pleated um sleeves, and those are just basically just for styling purposes, is to make the garment look nice, and design purposes. And another styling or design purpose is gathering, and as the word suggests, gathering the fabric together. So basically, to gather fabric together, you need to have two stitches that are smaller than the seam allowance. So if you give yourself a 1 centimeter seam allowance, then you would have a 0.8 stitch, and the other one is a zero point 0.5 stitch. And make sure that those stitches are very, very loose, because you want to be able to have the fabric sliding through the thread and gathering, as the word said. So, yeah, guys, I hope you guys have learned today. I hope you guys have taken down notes. You've learned new words. If not, that's also fine. That just means that you are now familiar with the words that I have been using, and that's a good thing, right? So, yeah, guys, until tomorrow morning, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share this with anyone who is interested in knowing how to sew. Patterns is very important. Patterns is crucial to the garment making process. Patterns is the love of my life. I'm joking, but patterns is really important, and I think that with anyone or anybody who is interested in learning how to sew, this is the foundation. So yeah, until next time, guys, see you guys tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. And yeah, guys, bye.